Aloha Hawaii, this is Pokalai Nui and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri on radio station KWAI 1080 on your AM dial. We are broadcasting from the top of the Chinese Cultural Plaza here in Honolulu, Hawaii. The opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of the staff and management of this radio station or of the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation. We'll begin with this program's discussion of taking a look at the international arena, something that I like to check in with every once in a while and see what's happening there, and then we'll bring it to some local issues, and of course the local issue will be the recent Hawaii Supreme Court decision with regards to rail. So, internationally, we have a number of wars or warring events going on, and another event where a lot of the folks out of Israel would like to get into a war with Iran. So let's talk about Iran first, then we can move to Syria, we can talk about what's happening in Pakistan, what's happening in Afghanistan. Of course, Iraq should still be on our radar, and that's been off because we believe that the U.S. has essentially pulled out of Iraq, but that's not necessarily the case. And if you would like to call and share your views on some of these matters, our telephone number here is 524-1080. Give me a call. We'll put you on the radio and give you an opportunity to share some of your views or respond to mine with regards to our international review of these events. So if we began with Iran, we continue to have the saber rattling that is occurring in especially Israel, and there's a presumption, and what gets me very upset is how the media's report with regards to Israeli view of Iran is without even questioning it. They just assume that the Israelis are correct, that the Iranians are planning and are in the process of developing nuclear weapons, and that this process must end, and we cannot let the Iranians continue with this or in this process. And so they're talking about initiating an attack upon Iran to stop this from occurring. Well, the latest news I'm getting out of Israel is that while the prime minister and the president, who's that, now I'm forgetting these names, but these two individuals who have been saber-rattling are not being supported by the generals and those others within Israel itself to bring about the war in, or to bring about an attack in Iran. And so while we are getting reports that the Israelis are on the verge of arming and getting ready to train their troops to do this invasion, what I'm hearing coming out of Israel is something contrary, that there is a large opposition, and in fact the general opposition is larger than those who are persuaded that they will conduct a war against Iran. Of course, part of the problem there is what will the U.S. do, and will the U.S. come in and support Israel should Israel initiate a war against Iran? Of course, whenever one initiates war, it's really hard to say who initiated the war, because they carry out a pretense that we are merely responding to a war initiated by the party that we are attacking. That's the way, or that's the conversation as it was carried out between George Bush and the rest of the American public, that it wasn't really the Americans who were initiating this war in Iraq or in Afghanistan, but this was a response of the attack upon us in the 9/11 events. Of course, the facts were quite to the contrary, that there was no initiation of an attack or anything to do with the 9/11 events in New York City out of Iraq. and yet Bush wanted to invade and go after Saddam Hussein, and then the message gets even more confused. So you can tell when a political leader or a head of state, and let's not just assume that he was necessarily a leader, when this head of state begins to mix the message or confuse the message, and over a period of time you don't know really what the message was, other than now that we're in this country we need to support the troops and continue to provide them with all armaments that they need to finish the job, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a very stupid, a very idiotic rationale, a progression of rationale. While you may not agree that the initial invasion into a country was appropriate, the fact that because we are now there, we need to finish the job and then pull out. No, if you recognize that the initial conflict was created by wrong-headed people, you should simply pull out and not finish any job, because the job that you want to finish is also wrong-headed. So with regards to what's happening in Iran, Israel is hoping to draw the United States in to support Israel should they decide to attack Iran, because Barack Obama is not getting that close with Israel. They are saying, well, we still want to see what happens. We are not saying that we will support Israel. We are not giving you that commitment. Mitt Romney says something completely different. He's kissing up to the Israelis and trying to not only get closer, but pretend that he is familiar with international affairs, and in that way is trying to convince the Jews in America that he should be supported for the presidency. So you have many of these different factors playing in to this conversation. The other fact is that many of the Jews in America do not want the United States to support an attack upon Iran, and can see what the play is using the political season in the United States by the leadership or by the prime minister in Israel, how they are trying to manipulate to advance their particular interests and not necessarily the interests of the United States. So you have all those political things going on. In the meantime, what is Iran doing? Well, it is sitting there, and more recently they have covered certain areas that are being spied upon by the IAEA, or agents of the United Nations. They are being spied upon by these satellites, these both military as well as commercial satellites, over different areas where there is a suspicion that if there is any activity going on with regards to developing nuclear weapons, they would be at these places. So what the Iranians have done is they have covered these areas with plastic. As a result of using this particular type of plastic to cover these sites, the satellites are not able to penetrate through the plastic. And so the suggestion that, oh, why are they covering it? If they didn't cover it, then we'll be able to successfully do our spine inspection. The Iranians are saying there's nothing to hide, and we are covering it basically because we don't like the idea of anyone spying upon any of our property. And since when was spying appropriate, and that we needed to go along with someone spying upon our lands? I'm asking the continuing question: if we support the Iranians having to be inspected by the IAEA, then would it not be also appropriate and equally appropriate to have the IAEA also go into Israel and inspect whether or not they have nuclear weapons? And if they do, then the result should be the same: remove their nuclear weapons. If that is the case, or if we are to have the IAEA going to Iran, then would it not be the same for they also going into the United States and inspecting and removing nuclear weapons within the United States? What is good for the goose is good for the gander. This idea of hypocrisy in the international arena simply does not make sense. And you can see, I would suggest any child can see that this is hypocritical. The policies that is now going on is a hypocrisy, where the United States claim that this country should not have nuclear weapons. And yet that very country who is making that accusation is the major proliferator of nuclear weapons, has the most nuclear weapons in the world, and probably combined with all other countries with nuclear weapons, the United States is ahead. The United States is saying, however, oh, that's not really the case, because we don't know how many nuclear warheads China now has. And you know this dirty trick that they are pulling? What they are doing is they are arming their intercontinental ballistic missiles with dummy nuclear warheads. And why are they doing that? Just to throw us off, so that we will aim at all their ICBMs, believing that they are nuclear weapons, when they don't have that much. Or do they? What they have done by arming their ICBMs with dummy warheads just increases our uncertainty as to how many they have, and they should be more up and up and more truthful, so that we can prepare our nuclear weapons aimed at the right targets. So in the meantime, they are criticizing the Chinese for investing more and more into their weaponries of self-defense, or one can also say equally of self-offense, and criticizing the Chinese for these step up of these armaments. And now they can have these missiles to reach from one continent to another continent and all of the islands in between. On the other hand, the Chinese are saying, well, wait a minute. Count how many American bases there are throughout the world, and the fact that they are setting up more and more American bases closer and closer to Chinese borders. And you ask us, why are we taking a defensive posture? Why are we arming ourselves? Because the United States is attempting to put bases all around to contain China. So the suggestion that one should look at the other side of the equation is, I think, a valid suggestion. Just as much that we would hope that the Chinese would denuclearize and begin the disarmament process, the United States should be doing the same thing. And every time they criticize another country, they should be following that criticism and wiping out their nuclear weapons as well as military bases. Okay. Meanwhile, Iran is not just twiddling its thumbs. Iran has recently been elected by the largest organization at the United Nations, or the largest group of nations which has formulated themselves into an organization, and they are the non-aligned nations. This non-aligned, there's an M somewhere, non-aligned movement, NAM, of nations, about 120 of them, are many of these nations that have recently become independent, or since the sweep of decolonization occurred, they became decolonized from their colonial masters, generally European nations. And through that process of decolonization, they have united, and they say that we will not align ourselves with either the communists or the capitalists in this Cold War. And this is carried forward. And for a time, they had different people elected as the head of the organization, or state representatives heading the organization, and previously it was Cuba. And the United States, not wanting to associate with Cuba, decided not to become involved and tried to encourage the head of the United Nations not to participate in these meetings that they were having. More recently, Iran has been elected by these 120 or so nations to head that organization for the next 4 years. Now, how can you have Iran elected to give leadership to this non-aligned movement? Just like, how could you possibly have Cuba elected to give leadership to this non-aligned movement? Could it possibly be that as we look at those situations, we are not really seeing it as is being reported by the media or the American media, because the American media is so tilted into one direction, which is only seeing it from the Washington, D.C. point of view, that we are not getting the true story. How is it that whenever, what's his name, Fidel Castro, would go to the United Nations, he would receive standing ovations for long periods of time for the speeches that he delivered, and yet it is not popularly or regularly reported in the American media to the American public, but it's reported all around the world. How is it that Iran has recently been elected? I submit that it is because Iran has been able to provide the kind of leadership that the majority of the General Assembly is looking for. The ability to stand up against the American lion sitting on the hill and trying to dictate from his hill what happens in other countries. So the United States is saying, okay, you folks are going to have a meeting, and the meeting is occurring, in fact, at the end of this month or in the last week of this month. It may be going on as I speak. But they are saying that Ban Ki-moon should boycott, should not attend, should not visit Iran because of all these complications and the fact that they are trying to develop nuclear weapons. For a time, Ban Ki-moon is saying, well, I haven't decided yet, and when I decide, I'll tell you. Well, about 2 days ago, he made his announcement. He said, yes, I am going to Iran, and I will engage the leaders of that country, and I need to go because this non-aligned movement is indeed a large movement, part of the General Assembly, or members of the General Assembly, and it's an appropriate political entity that I should show up at. In the meantime, the Americans are very angry. The Israelis are also very angry because it seems to give credence, it seems to give validity to the administration in Iran. And the people of Iran are, of course, very proud to see that this is occurring. They're very proud to see that Iran is at least willing to speak up about the integrity of their sovereignty. Now, there's great division with regards to particularly Ahmadinejad and his style of leadership. Like every other country, even in the United States, great division with regards to the style of leadership by Barack Obama. And that's part of the campaign that is going on. So Ahmadinejad in Iran is also facing his challenges. But as a national projection of who the Iranians are, they are very proud of the fact that their country is going to host this very large organizational meeting, and the fact that Iran does stand up to the United States and to Israel. So, if you would like to comment on my summary of what is occurring with regards to Israel, the United States, and Iran, our telephone number is 524-1080. Give me a call and we'll put you on the air. The next subject is with regards to Syria, a very serious conflict going on, a conflict being promoted by the United States, a conflict being promoted not only by the United States but a number of other countries who are being directed by the United States to send in armaments through these other avenues or venues, but dictated by the CIA and by Washington, D.C. And they are, of course, giving armaments and monies and support to the rebels, or the so-called rebels. Now, in the Syrian case, because the United States is against the central government, these rebels are not called terrorists, although their tactics are indeed terroristic, although their techniques, the footprint of what they are doing are terroristic. They are not called terrorists, and they are not seen by the United States as being included in this so-called war against terrorism. Okay. So the term terrorist is a very fluid term whenever you hear the Americans use it, because you're not sure how they're using it, and it has become a question of merely what side does the United States stand for and what side do they stand against. If they are standing against a particular side, then they are very free to use the term terrorist as it applies to one or another party. But if it's on the side of the United States, they stay away from those comments, and it's okay to supply the rebels. It's okay to intervene in a civil war. It's okay to do these things because they are aligned with the United States. And that's exactly what is happening in Syria. So the United States is setting up Saudi Arabia and other of their satellite countries to intervene in this war and to send money and send support to the rebels to overthrow Prime Minister Assad. Now, Assad isn't all that being a good boy, because he has internal rebellion occurring in his country, and like anyone who is dedicated to keep the peace, but perhaps more important, to keep him in power, they are using tactics, which is very unfortunate, but they are using tactics to quell those fights that is going on. Who is a responsible party? I would say not necessarily the two parties now acting up, but the parties who have instigated these kinds of rebellions that is going on from the outside. And for that I will include the CIA and all the secret monies and weapons that they have sent in to Syria in order to create this smokescreen of a legitimate grassroots autochthonous uprising within the Syrian government. Okay. And finally, what is happening in Pakistan, the Americans are still sending in more drones and killing people in Pakistan who they claim are taking guns over from Pakistan to Afghanistan. Of course, the Pakistanis are very upset about it, and we'll see if there's going to be repercussions with regards to allowing the U.S. to continue to use Pakistan as the routing for weapons that the United States is now sending into Afghanistan, through the use of Pakistan. Okay, a lot of foreign issues.
Kaulana pua o Hawaii, kupa ama hope o ka aina, iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, pala pala nunu me ka paka Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave Koku ana honoa o Pi'ilani Ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano Pa'aku me ke one o ka kuhi hewa Aolea e kau I ka pulima Maluna o ka pepa o ka enemi Po o hui ai nā ku ai hewa I ka pono sivila a o ke kanā